And I think with each of my books, they come from a different spark. So I think it's just being open. But I think first of all, ideas come when you set the intention that you want one.
Welcome to the Creative Solutions Podcast. On the show, it's my job to tease out the creative solutions my guests are coming up with to change the world through creativity, social action, and mindset. I also give you tips and techniques so you can do the same. This episode is brought to you by my class, Meditation for Busy People, where you'll learn how to relieve stress and discover clarity and joy in just 5 minutes a day. It's also brought to you by the Brain FM app and this podcast's host, Podbean. Also, follow the podcast on Instagram or TikTok and check out our shop for merch, music, and musings. The links are all in the show notes. Hello, and welcome to the Creative Solutions Podcast. I'm your host, Izolda Trachtenberg. Super grateful that you're here. I'm super grateful that my new best friend, who I have so much in common with, is a guest, Jaclyn Goldis. I actually, and even to that, I have a younger sister named Goldis, so it's just really amazing how many things we have in common. I'm super excited to introduce you to her. Jaclyn is a graduate of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, like I am, and NYU Law, like I almost was. She practiced trust and estate law at a large Chicago firm for 7 years before leaving her job to travel the world and write novels. How cool is that? Her debut novel, When We Were Young, it's historical women's fiction, was published in 2021 by Hachette Forever. Her next novel, The Chateau, actually the most recent novel, I should say at this point, because it's already out. It's a mystery thriller, and it was released in May 2023 from Simon & Schuster, Atria, Emily Bestler Books. Jaclyn, I'm super excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
It's so amazing how much we have in common.
That's what I was about to say. Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So I think I'm probably twice your age, but it does not matter. Once a Wolverine, always a Wolverine. So I would love to just start with that. Actually, you grew up in Michigan. You went to U of M, and what got you from U of M to law school, and then to going, you know what? I this isn't the life for me. I'm going to chuck it all and go travel the world and write books. Can you talk about what that, because that's a mindset thing that I adore, and I'd love to know how that worked for you.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think I have to start by saying I never actually wanted to be a lawyer, which I know is a funny thing to say, of someone who went to law school and 7 years at a law firm, like you said. So it went down a decade-long path. In a direction maybe that I wasn't passionate about and didn't necessarily see a long-term future in. I always wanted to be a writer since my earliest memory. I was always writing stories. Even before I could write, I was like cobbling together pictures from coloring books and making stories out of them. So it was really always my dream and my intention. But I don't think when you're 22 and about to graduate college, at least speaking for myself, that, I had, the savings to go try to do that, and B, had the life experience, frankly,
Right.
to be able to be writing kind of stories with the depth that I would have wanted. And I wrote a novel when I was 17. It was my first novel, actually, after coming to Israel on a summer program. I was so inspired. And so I wrote a book set in Israel, which is actually where I live now. But so I wrote that book when I was 17, and I wrote 2 books in my 20s. So I was trying for it. I was kind of running these 2 parallel careers. And why law school? Well, I knew I needed a career that was going to give me security. And I thought I would be good at law. I mean, I was a good writer, so I thought that would lend itself to law. And I did well in the LSAT. So, I kind of just started down that path, and I thought, okay, well, I might not last longer than a couple of years at a big law firm, because frankly, I saw how, people were working till 4 a.m, and to be doing that for something I wasn't passionate about, I didn't really envision being able to do that. But I ended up kind of falling into such a nice practice of law, like estate planning, which was more, I would say, lifestyle friendly. And I really liked the people I worked with. I liked what I did. I did not hate it. It was enjoyable. It wasn't like my passion. I still felt this deep desire to be writing novels, but I ended up staying there way longer than I thought. And yeah, at a certain point, I think like for personal reasons and for career reasons, it was like really, it just felt like the right time to leave and to give my writing dreams like a real shot. I really wanted
Mm.
to devote more time to them. So that's when I
Wow. I love that so much. I love
left.
that. No, I do, because I got into American University Law, and I was doing music at the time, and had to decide between music and the law, and kept deferring and deferring and deferring. And then finally they were like, either you come to law school or you don't, you're going to have to start all over. And I went, okay, music it is. And so
Wow.
it takes a certain amount of courage. Speaking for myself, it took a lot of like, okay, I'm going to just do it. And
Wow.
and so for you, when you went, okay, that's it, my creativity deserves to be at the front of my life. Can you talk a little bit about what went into the decision-making process about that?
Yeah, I think it wasn't a decision I made with my logic part of my brain. I don't think
Mm.
anything that I've done since law has been. And I, and I think that, I don't know, I think I've been on a spiritual journey like for the past at least 15 years, like
Mm.
simultaneous. And I just really believe in following my heart over my head, as
Mm.
maybe crazy that sounds to some people. But I've always had a belief, to be honest, that I was going to make more money writing than I ever did in law. And I haven't proven that yet. I mean, I'm able to make, nice money now, but like definitely not to the level I was making as a lawyer, but I
Mm.
really still believe I will.
Mm.
And so I don't know, I think it was just an intuition thing. I've always had this vision of this like career I would have and this life I would have, this creative life I would be able to have. And I've really always felt certain it was possible. So, it's not that there's all this evidence for that, but it's
Mm.
been like more of an internal belief. And I always follow that over what everyone says is possible, because I truly believe more is possible than what most people think. And there's so many stories about, what careers you can make money and by what age you have to do certain things. And I feel like all of that is ridiculous.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I guess I maybe am a little bit of a rebel in that way.
I love that you are. And I love what you said about intuition. It's so powerful, that gut feeling and trusting it. I think maybe that's where the courage comes from, is that you have to trust your gut feeling and
Yeah.
go with that. And I want to talk about that more, but I want to come back to Michigan, and let's reminisce a little bit, if you will. So you went to Michigan, and we grew up just a few miles from each other
Yeah.
when we were when we were kids. We have so much in common. It's really funny how much we have
Oh,
in common.
wild.
But so for many people, for myself included, where do you go to school? You go to either Michigan or Michigan State. You chose Michigan, and I feel like it's a split. On the one hand, you have this very deep research, engineering, science facet. And on the other hand, if you live anywhere near East Quad, you're going to be in a more artistic, or North Campus, you're going to be in a more artistic part of your brain. And you say that you follow your intuition more. Can you tell me a little bit about what that experience was like for you in this space that has both of those things pulling at you all the time?
Yeah. Well, I love that question. And I love the thinking about it, because while I follow my intuition now, always, it was not like that when I was younger.
Mm.
And so I think when I was at Michigan, I was in very much a logic, what are you supposed to do
Mm.
kind of phase in my life, not what do I want to do? It's what do people want me to do, and what is
Right.
expected of me, and how can I act in this world in a way that will be palatable. So I think when I look back at my college life and the me in college and that time in my life, early 20s, that's how I was operating. So it's very different from how I operate now.
Yeah, and it is interesting to me how we go through these phases. And it sounds like this one for you is a permanent phase. I'm in that same place where my intuition, my what's possible brain is what's
Yeah.
at the forefront. And yet at
Yeah.
Michigan, there was definitely, I went through the whole gamut. I was going to be a pre-med major, then a pre-law major, then a political science major. Then I went to
Yeah.
English and English drama. Yes. And so, but it takes some time to access that creative upswell in yourself, and even more time, I think, to trust it for a lot of us.
Yeah.
And so I would love to talk to you a little bit about and get your thoughts on that being creative as a lifestyle, because that's what yours is now. So there, I have a bunch of questions about where you get your ideas and all that, but I would love to delve right into that notion of, because this is the Creative Solutions podcast, so I get to talk about it. What is that creative juice for you? I call it the juice and sizzle with my coaching clients. What is that juice and sizzle for you about creativity that means so much that it's become the main part of your life?
Wow. I love the question. I mean, for me, when I approach a project, it's always what feels fun and what do I feel curious about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so fun, as you said, to be able to make a career out of that. I mean, that's like wild. And I pinch myself every day that I get to do it, because it's like, it can be, from something, I'm interested in sustainable fashion. And so somehow that's going to play into a career or a company and a book I'm writing. And then I get to do all this research about, I write a lot of Jewish stories, Jewish characters, and different, sometimes pinging from Jewish history, sometimes something more modern. I find that really interesting because I'm Jewish and I really like tapping into that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think for me, like what gives me joy in terms of learning about and writing about is where I usually direct my creativity. Not usually, always.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you said that, because that question of what brings me joy, for a lot of people, they don't stop to ask themselves that question. And even if they do, again, it takes a lot of courage. And then how do you know? So speaking about mindset again, how do you know when something makes you happy? Like, I understand now, but when you were making that transition from, we'll say, more left brain logical person to more right brain creative, even though I know both sides of the brain play in, but let's simplify it a little. When you were making that transition, how did you figure out what was making you happy?
Yeah. Wow. That's such a good question. I think like most decisions I make in life is, does this feel good in my body? Will this bring me joy? And I think they're connected. I think like something that feels good in my body and brings me joy feels light, feels fun. It like feels like my body a little bit leaning towards that thing, instead of when you hear something and you contract or lean away. It feels expansive. It feels like growth. It feels maybe a little bit risky, like a little bit stepping into some unknown that I don't know where it's going to lead, but it feels like, ooh, I'm kind of excited to find out where that leads. It doesn't, yeah, it's interesting. It's even like thinking about, frankly, I'm thinking about the next book I'm going to write, because I'm starting a new one. And I was thinking about setting it, because I always use setting. Setting for me is really fun because I love to travel. So it's like very fun for me to pick a place that I'm curious about and like follow that kind of spark. And I was going to set a book in Bali because I've spent five months in Bali, and it's like pretty exotic. I feel like that's a location people would be interested in. And I do want to set a book there eventually, but I wasn't feeling that like really expansive, like, ooh, this feels so kind of, ooh, where is this going to lead? It was feeling more safe, maybe because I've spent so much time there. And so when I started thinking about a different location, which I won't say right now, but I started to get that, like that buzz almost, where you start to vibrate a little bit, and I go down the Google rabbit hole, and I'm, researching one thing, and it leads to the next thing, and it leads to the next, and my mind's spinning, and I'm thinking that's like when I know an idea has legs, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. It absolutely does, and it's funny. I spent, after graduating Michigan, I moved to DC, met my husband, have been with him for 30 years, and lived there but always wanted to live in New York. Like literally when our plane was flying in, when we were immigrating, we flew into JFK and I saw the skyline and was like, oh, and I was 7 and I knew
Wow.
I had to live there someday. It only took
Wow.
45 years and then I did it. But the point is my first 2 books that were fiction take place in New York while I was living in DC. My most recent book, which is a mystery novel, I'm living in New York City, but it is set in DC. So, so,
I
so
love that.
location is it's fascinating to me. And one of the things that I noticed about the book of yours that I'm currently reading, I know I haven't finished and I'm almost there. The Chateau has very juicy, descriptive details, but they're almost like you interweave them beautifully in the story, and I want to come back to that because that is something that you and I have in common. We both love Agatha Christie, and she did that so beautifully as well. But when you're writing, and I'm taking a left turn at Albuquerque, if you will, when you're writing, especially location, and you don't have to give anything away about the upcoming book, what do you decide is important enough to include in your world building of the setting?
Hmm. I love that question. And I think it kind of goes to how I write in general, which is without much logic involved in
Mm-hmm.
it. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are concrete decisions I'm making that do have, I mean, I'm making plot decisions with story in mind. So it's not like I definitely don't just like sit down in front of a blank page and just like let the story take me wherever. But I do feel like in setting and in a lot of things, I'm just going with it. Like for me, it's like how I live my life, I think is how I do my books, and which is I like some routine. I like some structure to my day and same with my books. I like some structure to my book where I go in and I know the plot points and I know certain things. And then I like between that to be a lot of freedom so that when I like how in my day I have like to have a lot of space and flow. So I like that with my books too. And I would say, I don't know that I'm thinking so concretely about what do I want to bring in from the setting. I mean, of course, I'm trying to draw on all the senses. And so I know if I'm like leaning too heavily on um visual descriptions that I want to like, because sometimes I forget the smell and the taste,
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things. But and I feel like all that's important to really like bombard someone with the setting, but or a reader with the setting. But yeah, I do feel like it's more, and maybe it's because I've written so many books at this point, not all, most of them have not been published, but I do feel like I understand the rhythm of story certainly more than I did with my first, second, third books. So yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you said that. And I love that you said that because I know so many writers listen to this show and feel like, oh, I'm a failure if I've written a book and it hasn't been published. And
Mm,
I love that you're going, the first, second, third, fourth books, they never got published. It's all good.
totally.
And can you give your advice about that? I would love,
Yeah.
what advice do you have to especially creatives who are writing when they feel like I've created this beautiful thing and no one's ever going to read it, and that maybe that's okay because the next one will be something different. What are your thoughts about that? What advice do you give to someone who's going through that right now?
Yes, I have so many thoughts about that. I think that I think books are a little bit of a mystical kind of entity that you can't really control. You sort of have to follow a book. And I don't think every book's mission is to be published. I
Mm,
think some books' missions are to teach us, to elicit something from us, and you kind of just have to follow this like magical path of a book. It's like I don't think you can always force it. And I think for me, you know, the first 3 novels I wrote, I so wanted each of them. I remember each book, finishing it, and I so wanted each one to be the one that got me the agent. And it was such a disappointment when the rejections are rolling in, and it's like a lot to contend with for
sure.
sure. But I really believe that each of those books that didn't make it are invisibly present in now my books that do. And I am so glad none of them got published. Looking back, wow, I never want those to see the light of day. And, it's hard to, feel that in the moment. But I do think when I look back at those experiences that there was some sort of intuition, I think at a certain point that like the book had reached the end of its path and this book wasn't going to be it. And kind of honoring that book for, wow, you taught me a lot, like, because I kept getting better. And I think if you can see your improvement, you're on the right track. I don't think it's that you have to have that external marker of I got an agent or a publisher to know you're on the right track. I think as long as you see your growth and you feel like you keep getting better, then it's like, just keep going. And I'm so glad that I didn't, choose to spend, say, 10 years on one of those books and just keep pushing it into I'm glad I think it's a really important skill to be able to know when something's done and to move on. And I'm so glad I moved on. And yeah, I've become such a better writer because of those books. So I'm so grateful for them, because it's much easier for me to write a book now. It's much easier. It's much more fun. It's much more seamless. So I'm grateful for them. And I think I teach workshops sometimes, and sometimes writing retreats. And I do see people who get very stuck on a book, like this one has to be it. And I guess my advice is, don't get stuck on, be willing to move on, be willing to try something different. There's no failure, because every book teaches you something. And especially if you have fun with a book, if you can like try to find joy within the writing, then the external validation of it matters a bit less. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that you said that. And what I tell my coaching clients is, when you're done, be done. You have to sort of put the final punctuation point on it, mark at the end, and maybe you'll come back to it, maybe you won't, but the other part of it is, don't throw it away. As in, you might find that there's something about that book that is important to you 20 years later. So don't discount it completely, but it doesn't have to, like you said, it doesn't have to be published. And it's interesting, when I go back and I read my early books, I go, oh, I tried really hard. It was, you are where you are in the process. And so I would love to ask you, I keep feeling like I'm going backwards, but I'd love to ask you, let's back up a little bit and ask you where your ideas come from. Now, you mentioned you like to do setting first, and you write a lot of Jewish stories or Jewish characters. But when you're like, you made the decision, for example, it's not going to be Bali, it's going to be this other place. Is that your intuition, or is there a muse? Is there you're reading the newspaper or scrolling through Instagram that comes up and you listen to it? How do you follow those breadcrumbs?
Yeah. Ideas are so interesting. I could talk for forever about them. I find it so fascinating where ideas come from. It's like the birthplace of something is so fascinating to me. And I think with each of my books, they come from a different spark. So I think it's just being open. But I think, first of all, ideas come when you set the intention that you want one. So I feel like when I have space for a new book and a new project, it's like I'm setting the intention to whatever. I mean, I talk to the universe. I have like a God relationship that I envision as God, but I don't think you need that. I think it's just like stating an intention and like, being open to kind of receive it. So I feel like I state that I'm ready, but also I feel like I have this weird relationship with a book. Like I kind of talk to my books. I kind of imagine them as like existing entities, and it really starts from the first germinating kind of seed. So I think it's like it's a conversation where sometimes like I said, it does start with place. Usually for me, it's like picking a place, and usually picking a few different kind of motifs that then are threaded together. I would say with the Chateau, it was, there's a World War II storyline in there, and that's kind of where the seed started for me, because it's inspired loosely by some family like history of mine, and picking the Provence setting, and there's an art angle in the book, and once kind of all those things threaded together, and I thought about the study abroad. These women come together because they studied abroad together. And even though girls' trips with women has been done in the murder mystery realm, I had never seen like a study abroad kind of reason bringing people together. So I liked that. So I feel like it's like once all those unique factors came together and I was like, ooh, this feels fun. It's always goes back to fun. This feels like exciting. This feels like it could be joyful for me to write. Yeah, that's when I start to feel like, ooh, and then it takes off from there. Cause obviously then morphs into characters and subplots and whatever. But I feel like I start with those, 4 or 5 like seeds that kind of weave together.
I love that you said that they weave together, because here's my next question.
Yeah.
What happens when it's not working? In other words, you're writing and you've written yourself, you say you write by intuition. Have you ever written yourself into a corner and gone, oh, this makes no logical sense with what I wrote 150 pages ago? Has that ever happened? And if so, how do you deal with that?
So I do like, it's interesting describing it because I do plot pretty significantly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's like, but still within, I might write a 10 or 15 page synopsis before I start a book. That's like what I've been doing lately. Partly because my publisher wants it, but also I like plotting in that way. I like knowing the contours of book, and I did with Chateau also, but I still feel like within that there's a lot of freedom. There, like when you ask the question about setting, there's so much freedom to expand, and there's so much freedom to expand into character realms. So I usually do know the plot points, and I do know
Mm-hmm.
the book's going to work in that way. So I feel like at this stage, no, I don't feel like I'm writing myself into a corner, but that doesn't mean that certain things don't work. I feel like there's always, I don't know, my experience has been with each book, there's like always some challenge where it's like, how is this going to work?
Right.
And I have a book coming out next year, and that's done. And in that one specifically, there was something that I was like, I don't think this is going to work. I just don't know how to make this work. And I had the whole plot, it was otherwise working, but there was just one thing I couldn't figure it out. And I knew if I didn't figure it out, the book just wasn't going to work. And I think that in that scenario, I lean back on my overriding, superseding belief always that it's working. Somehow I know this book was given to me because I am supposed to be writing it. And so obviously this point that I'm frustrated over and, sometimes go into derail into this thinking of like, this is going to torpedo the book. Then when I step back, I'm like, no, it's going to work. It's somehow going to work, and it's going to take the time it takes to figure it out, but it's going to work.
Mm.
And, that's what happened. It took a couple of months, and then I had the light bulb moment, and I figured out how to make it work. And the cool thing is like, usually when that happens, I figure out a way to make it work that makes the book so much better than it would have been if I hadn't figured out that piece.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like some of that stuff is like the magical kind of part of writing, but also the part where you have to have patience and you have to let a book just like kind of marinate in you. And I feel like for my practical tip in that, at least this is what works for me, is I need space away from technology and in nature. So I live next to the beach. I every morning go on a 45-minute walk on the beach, on the sand without my phone. And I usually do the same thing at sunset too. So that is like, for me, I mean, it's mental health and like just
Oh, yeah.
healthy health, like a health thing, but it's also to me work time, because when I'm in a book, oh my God, I can't even explain the amount of ideas I get. Like, it's like I'm always, when I'm writing a book, at least the first draft, I'm always like preparing in the morning, kind of like, okay, this is the scene I'm going to write. I'm like kind of almost visualizing how it's going to look. And then on the beach, I have so many ideas of, oh, do this. And, I run home, and if I'm on edit stage and something's like maybe needs to be massaged and I don't know how to do it when I'm walking on the beach, always the ideas download. So I do think it's also, if something's not working or it's going hard, it's like opening up space to get the answers of how to resolve it. Cause I think it's hard to figure things out when you're just like mired in technology and, when you're not like in a receptive mode.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I do it a little differently in that when it's a thorny problem, I will tell my brain to think about it before I go to sleep. Like I make that
Oh,
the
I like
last thing
that.
I
Love that.
think, and then
Love
I
that.
often wake up in the morning with the solution right in front of me. And so, and
Love
and
that.
it's actually interesting. This is an Israel story. I learned the multiplication tables in Israel when we were living in Israel, when we were immigrating. My father wrote them out to me. 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times 2 is 2. And he wrote them out till 9 by 9. And he had me read them all out and then put them under my pillow right before I went to sleep. And I woke up the next morning and I knew the entire multiplication
Oh,
table.
I love that
So
story.
we
Oh,
were
that's the best story.
we were living in B'nai Brak at the time,
Ah,
and it was just so fascinating. I was 7, and I think about it now and I'm like, how did exactly that work? But my subconscious went, oh, this is what you need to know. Great. And then plop, here it is. So that aspect of you taking the time out in nature by the water, which is the ocean is my favorite place.
me too.
When you're there, you say you run home. Do you ever lose ideas in that run home, or are you able somehow to keep the ones, like I say, keep the best, lose the rest? But what happens if an idea goes bloop bloop bloop? I'm out of reach now. What are your thoughts about that, and how do you approach that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I love that multiplication table story. Oh my God, that's so good. I so believe that. And I've heard that about people who set intentions when they go to sleep. And I think I've tried that a couple times and I forget that that's like a tactic I can try. So thank you for that. I'm going to totally use that.
My
But
pleasure.
but in terms of losing ideas, I don't think that I don't think we lose. I don't think we lose the ideas that we're meant to have. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I do. When I'm in a particularly deep work period where like a lot of ideas are coming and I'm thinking about the book a lot, I do, I could go on a walk and get 5 ideas. And sometimes I find myself like ticking them in my head, like, okay, remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like they come. It's like I don't feel like I'm gonna miss something. So I'm not super precious about it. I mean, I do carry a notebook with me a lot and I write in my notes app on my phone. So when I'm, not on the beach, I would obviously be, jotting down my idea if I had it. But yeah, I don't find that I lose ideas.
Awesome. I'm glad you don't. I lose them and have to. I'm constantly chasing them. I'm
Oh,
constantly chasing my wait, come back, and so I do carry my phone, but like that's how I write my books too. I wrote 3 of my books walking my dog in the woods, voice to text. While I was walking my
wow, I
dog,
love
I recorded
that.
them voice to text, and that was the way I did it. And and I think that's the thing about writers is there's no one way. There's no one
Yes,
right way to write, and
totally.
there's no one right way to be creative, and there's no one right way to publish. Some people go traditional, some people go independent. You have wrote a bunch of books, and then now you have a what you would call a traditional publisher. Can you talk a little bit about that process for you of finding an agent and what worked and what didn't work, and how you as a creative person dealt with that process?
Yeah, wow. My finding an agent process, I mean, took I think almost 20 years from when I first tried to
Ah,
get an agent to when I got one. And we've now been working together 5 years. So I would say it was hard and yeah, very hard for me at least. And I just think it required so much persistence and so much just um yeah, keep going. It's like I remember so my first book that was published when we were young, which you talked about, came out 2 years ago. And I remember when that was the first book I wrote when I left my law job and was traveling. And so and it was the first book I think I really learned how to write a book through it. Like it was not an easy book to write. It required so many edits and um so many learning moments that I think my subsequent books that I've written have just been easier since that book. I really look at that book as it taught me something, even though it wasn't by any means the first book I wrote, but it was like the first one where I was like, I really think this can go the distance. And so I just kept pushing it. But I remember was almost 2 years after I had left my law job. I really thought like, oh my God, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna write a book. I'm going to write a book and I'm going to get an agent really quickly. And that was not how it happened. And it was 2 years later. And I was like, oh my God, I thought I would have an agent have sold this book already. And it was like and I'd been rejected by so many agents. And it was like it was a very hard time. And I remember where I was because I had this moment with myself of, I love writing. I love this so much. brings so much joy to my life. I will never give up. You know, if I have to go back to law, if I have to get a different job, I'll do that, but I'm never giving up. I'm just going to keep going. You know, maybe it's a different book, maybe I don't know what, but I'm just going to keep going. And I so remember making that promise to myself. And then I signed with my agent 2 weeks later. And
Wow.
now we've been working together 5 years. But, you know, I do think it's like, I think that is so important. When I look back, it's like probably one of the more important moments I've ever had, because it's like committing to a thing because of the joy that thing gives you. It's like, no matter what external validation, you know, I got or not, I was like committing to it. And I said that's what I was going to pursue for the rest of my life, because I know that this is like important to me, and this is a mission for me, and it's what I love to do. So I think having that like purpose behind it, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe it like freed something up, and I mean, I don't feel like it's coincidence that then I got my agent 2 weeks later, but yeah, that was not an easy process.
Yeah, it's, and it's funny. It's not an easy process for, the millions of people out there who write books, and many never get an agent, many keep trying, and I think that's great. But I love what you said about that commitment, that it becomes almost a certainty, and then boom, 2 weeks later. But at the same time, it's not like you stopped. You didn't go, I commit to this and now I'm going to
No,
rest on my laurels, right?
right,
So
right.
there's a process there in that moment of going, I commit to this. And I have a friend who's a Wiccan, and her high priestess said to her, it's you can't cast a spell to lose weight while eating a Snickers bar. Shout out to Tina for that.
I
And
love that.
and I just went, yes. Yeah. When I heard that, I was like, absolutely. You can't do that. You can't go, I want to succeed at this and then wait for the success to come to you.
Totally.
You're going to have to do something. You're going to have to act on it somehow. So I would love to chat with you a little bit about what you said was the mission. You mentioned you have that is your mission. Can you talk a little bit about what your mission is and how you are addressing living your mission and working your mission on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. I feel like my mission is to channel my light through my books and through writing. And I feel like I feel like writing brings the highest kind of form of my energy, or what I want to say and who I want to be in this world, into manifest it. And
Mm,
I feel like personally, you know, my entire life as a reader, I've gotten so much joy from other people's words and from their books. And it's like, and I think that joy means something, you know, it's like there's so many ways to contribute to the world. And, you know, my sister's a humanitarian. And so she was, you know, for instance, living in Nigeria and going to the north of Nigeria to, you know, help the refugees in Boko Haram. And it's like so meaningful, you know, and I'm not going to say what I do is more meaningful than what she does, but I'm saying that we each have our own ways of like spreading our light. And I feel like my
mhm,
sister is completely in her highest way. And I feel like writing for me is in my highest way. And I think it's like any way you can add joy to the world and add more light and add, you know, like that's, I think, how we make a better world. And so I know for me personally, I've been so touched by, as a reader, by other people's books. And I feel like it's such a honor to be able to give that to other readers. And yeah, it feels like the highest form of my joy. So being channeled into books, and that feels very much like my mission. And also, like, you know, as part of that, writing Jewish stories, being able to tell stories that feel meaningful to me in some way, it feels important, and it feels like a way to affect change, you know, through entertainment. I would always want to foremost entertain people. It's like I'm not trying to write a textbook here, but I do
mm.
feel like through story, it's such a powerful way to teach people things and to maybe expose them to things they don't know, and that to think about things in a different way. So I feel like that's a very cool opportunity as an author.
I completely agree. And it's always best to me when it's almost incidental to the story. In other
Yes.
words, people will learn as part of being immersed in the world of the book that you've written, which I
Yeah,
love. And
totally.
so you got your peas in a pod. And it is interesting. My most recent book is all about a professional tarot card reader who works with the police to solve crimes. She's the
Ah,
detective in the mystery,
love it.
and and I read tarot professionally. So what's interesting about that to me is what a lot of the reviewers have said about the book is like, I feel like I learned how to read tarot through watching your character read tarot in the book. And
Oh,
it
I
was
love it.
unintentional, but it was, there it is. And so I love that we can learn through the books that we adore. And that brings me to my next question. Who are your favorite authors?
I love it. By the way, as a sidebar, of course, because I feel like we're the same person. I loved tarot also. And the book I just finished doesn't have a tarot reader detective, but there's like a tarot reader who contributes to solving a crime. So I love that we have so
Awesome.
much synchronicities. But who are my favorite authors? Well, definitely Agatha Christie. I mean, I adore her, and I feel like I read her late. I don't know, late, but like I read her in my early 30s,
Mm,
and I can't believe I didn't read her before. I don't know why I didn't. And I just binged like every single book she's ever written, and
mm.
her autobiography and her memoir about archaeology, and yeah, every love. I really love I would call my books like maybe, well, I mean, I only have one thriller out, but my next thriller also is in this vein. I feel a little bit like they're happy murders. So they're not like creepy murders. And I personally am very sensitive. I have a hard time um reading things that are really, really horrific. It really I don't know, I'm too sensitive for it. So I don't feel like that's where my writing goes, and it's not really where my taste is as a reader either. I think like Lucy Foley and Ruth Ware are both doing really cool kind of Agatha Christie like mystery thrillers now, and I really like both of them. I love Daniel Silva. He writes kind of uh political intrigue, international, secret Mossad agent. I love his books. He's an auto buy for me. I really like some rom-com, and how rom-com's getting pretty big right now. So I dabble in some of that. And I read a lot of spiritual nonfiction. So I guess those are my biggest kind of tastes as a reader.
Ah, they're awesome. I'm gonna have to. I don't know Daniel Silva, but I
Uh,
love reading about any book where there's a Mossad agent. I'm like, yes,
oh,
I am
you need
there.
to read him.
So
He's so good. He has a new book out next week, and he's my auto buy. So I will be getting it to my Kindle.
yeah, for sure. I'm gonna have to check him out. I love.
Yeah.
I took a class at Michigan with Professor Joe Blotner. May he rest in peace. What a great professor. It was a spy novel class where we got to,
Whoa.
I know, it was
That is
amazing.
so cool. Oh my
We
God, that
read
did not exist when I was at Michigan. And oh, I would have hopped to that class. That
it.
sounds so good.
It was so good. We read so many, Spy Who Came In From the Cold, Quiller, Tremor of Intent. If you've never read Anthony Burgess's
No,
Tremor of Intent, Anthony
no.
Burgess wrote a spy novel and it is brilliant. So I
Oh my
highly,
God.
highly, it
I'm
was
writing it
just
down.
reprinted. It was just reprinted a few years ago. It was out of print for a while. It is, I love Burgess anyway, but it's brilliant. So yeah,
Wow.
that whole notion of like the titillation of that kind of stuff. And it's interesting to me that you said that you write in many ways the same level, I guess, as you read. You said,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm too sensitive." I don't think you're too sensitive. I don't think there's such a thing. I think you're just sensitive where you are,
Yeah.
and you have to know what you like. You have to
Yeah.
know what works for you as a reader as well as a writer. It is interesting though that like I'm thinking about my own books and I'm going comfort zone. Where's my comfort zone with what I read versus what I write? And
Hmm.
am I overstepping? I'm going to have to give some thought to that because that's very interesting. I would like to shift gears a little. I could keep you here obviously for the next 6 hours, Jaclyn, because we have so much to talk
I
about.
would be happy.
Um, but I hope you'll come back when the next book comes out
Oh
and
my
chat
God, I would
more.
love to.
This is so much fun. But I would love to something I read about you You said, you were talking about changing the world, and you said that changing the world starts with having an emotion about something, and books that make readers feel seen. I would love, love, love to hear what your thoughts are about that notion, about through your books. You said that you're trying to bring your light into the world that way, but what do you believe makes readers feel seen in your books? Like, what about your books is that thing that makes someone go, yeah, she's speaking directly to me?
Hmm. I think like I think going there with our own vulnerabilities as authors is important. I think because I think that's how we can really mine our characters. And I know for myself as a reader, when you're reading in the interior lives of people. So it's not really, what we get in our day to day query how deep it is. Obviously sometimes you go deep with the people in your life, but a lot of things are surface. And I think books are such a um beautiful way to see people's inner thoughts and inner lives and see what their traumas in their past, why they've caused them to act in a certain way. And I think as humans, as readers, when I read, characters, I see myself in little places, and I see, oh, like, that thing is like how I feel, and it helps you almost work out something almost like therapy. I mean, books are kind of free therapy, I think,
Mm,
in some ways. And so, yeah, I think it's like those threads of humanity that connect us all and make us relate in certain ways to people, and maybe even understand the people in our lives better, because maybe someone on the page is maybe not like us, but like someone we know. And so, um, yeah, I think books that make us feel are, to me, the most powerful. And yeah, it's definitely something I try to do as a writer.
that's, I love that. And okay, so I'm going to ask this question, and it's a little weird, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In, in the Chateau, which I'm reading right now, what parts of you are in your characters?
Mm. Yeah, I have to. Well, you know what? The character of Jade, she's the only Jewish character
Mm,
of the girlfriends, and she has a family history. She has a father who um kind of survives the Holocaust, or not in concentration camps, but as a hidden child in France. And I guess that's a spoiler, actually. Now that I think of it, is that a spoiler? Okay, no, it's not a spoiler. Um, Not really, but and she has a child who there was like an anti-Semitic incident, like slurs said against her child at school. And I think that felt very close to home for me. I
mm,
think that everything that's going on in the world today with the anti-Semitism has been very personally upsetting and really affected me.
mm,
And we spoke a little bit about this in terms of our kind of crazy similarities, but my dad is a Soviet immigrant. He left the Soviet Union when he was 28. And there's so much trauma in my family's past related to anti-Semitism and related to the Holocaust. And
mm,
I think a lot about the inheritance of trauma and how that's passed to subsequent generations. And I've
mm.
thought about it a lot in my own life. And I think I've worked it out in, I think, my first book and also this one, on the page, I think, subconsciously. So yeah, I definitely think that those are the parts that were stewing most deeply in myself when I was writing this book. And so I think they came out most in that character. But I'm sure, other characters, I can't think off the top of my head but little snippets, and maybe not always from my own experiences, but also, observe all my friends, my family, people in my life. And so sometimes little things that they're going through might make it in. And it's never that any character is based off of someone else. It's never like that. But characters are so layered, and so things make it in that way.
It makes all sorts of sense to me. And, it's interesting thinking of anti Semitism. I never knew either grandfather because both died in the
Yeah.
Holocaust. And
Wow.
yeah, and also like my first. my first couple of days at Michigan, I lived in West Quad, and somebody knocked on my door and she asked if she could see my horns because she heard Jewish people had horns.
That is
And isn't that
wild.
wild? And
Wow.
hearing you talk about the fact that you have this kind of, it is educational. I mean, it is something people can learn. Not all your readers are Jewish. Your
Right.
non-Jewish readers will read this book and they'll get something out of it that will hopefully open their eyes. And I think that's amazing and wonderful. And so I guess the question I'd like to ask you before we wrap up, because I could keep you here for another 6 hours.
I could stay here for another 6 hours.
This is so much fun. So talk to me a little bit, if you don't mind, about two-part question. What do you want your readers to walk away with from reading your books? And what does creative success look like at the end of a book?
Love those questions. Okay, well, first, in terms of walking away with, I really feel foremost that I want to entertain and I want someone to have that experience, that blissful reading experience of like, I can't put it down. I'm so mesmerized. I'm so sucked into this world. Like that to me is more important than imparting any message, because I feel like it's just as important as imparting a message. It's like to put down a book as a reader and to feel that blissful joy is so the experience I want to give to anyone. So that's like number one. But then of course, like, like we've touched on the World War II storyline, the anti-Semitism storyline, like that to me is meaningful. And I think I think in particular, there's so many books that talk about the Holocaust and talk about the horrors of that time, but most books do it from a perspective of the past. And it's kind of rare that you see a Holocaust storyline or a World War II storyline, in a contemporary book with like implications towards today. And I think it's still, the Holocaust is still so resonant, not just resonant, but it's still impacting, people so deeply today in ways that I don't think are always talked about, in part, like in the inheritance of trauma. I mean, I see it living in Israel. There's, I think just walking around, you see the impacts of the Holocaust in day-to-day conversation and such. So I think that showing the contemporary kind of lingering effects feels powerful. And then wait, the second part of your question was, how do I measure creative success of a book? And I would say for that, truly, I really mean this. The biggest, creative success, and I'm not saying I don't pay attention to external success. I absolutely do. But to me, the biggest success of a book is how much fun I have writing it and how enjoyable the process is for me and how I feel while I'm writing, because I just finished writing a book also, a new one. So I can speak to, and it's always like the last month of a project. I feel like I'm almost on a high. It's like the book is pouring out of me. It feels very consuming. It feels so fun. And so that to me is honestly the biggest success of the process. And then of course there's the external success where it's so beautiful and wonderful. And I feel so blessed, if my agent loves it, if my editor loves it, if readers love it, if reviewers love it, of course. And not everyone does. Let's be honest. There's always going to be rejections from no matter what stage you are at this game, like some readers are not going to like it. Some reviewers are not going to like it. So I think it's like, I try to pay attention to that as little as I can. Of course, sometimes those negative voices get into my head, but I try not to get too caught up in it. Sometimes that doesn't work, but yeah, mostly I try not to get too caught up in it because it's kind of, I heard something someone said, which really resonated with me, which is like, once you're done with your book, you don't need to babysit it. Like, it's not your job to be babysitting it as to how everyone reacts to it and what happens with it. It's kind of like, I finished my job. I wrote this book. I'm going to promote it as best I can, but then it's kind of out of my hands and the rest is like, not really my business, so yeah.
I love that so much. And I think of what RuPaul said in her book. And she said in her autobiography, what people say about me behind my back is none of my business. And
I love that.
that was one of those truism moments. I've had a few of those in my life. Uh,
I love that too.
yeah, it's very, I love it so
Yes.
much. Uh, so before I let you go, I have a couple more questions. First of all, if somebody wants to find out about Jaclyn, and every time I see your last name, I'm like, it's not Golda, which is my sister's name. It's
Oh,
Goldis.
yeah.
So if somebody wants to find out more about you and more about your books, where should they go?
Yeah, well, I have a website, jaclyngoldis.com, so you can definitely go there. And at Jaclyn Goldis on Instagram is where I'm most active on social media.
All right, very cool. I will put those links in the show notes so that we get you that stuff. And also, if it's okay with you, I'd love to put the cover of at least the Chateau in the show notes
Yeah,
too, so
yeah,
that people can see what that looks like. That would be super fun. All
yeah,
right.
perfect.
Excellent. All right. I have one last question, and it's a question I ask everyone who comes on the show. But before I ask it, Jaclyn, I want to say thank you so much for joining me. This has been such a joy to get a chance to talk to you,
Oh,
especially about something that we have so much in common.
wow, I feel the exact same. Such a joy to talk to you. I really can't, my mind is blown at how much we have in common. And
It's
it's just so fun to chat. Yeah,
yeah, super fun.
I've had a blast.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm really glad. So this is my last question I ask everybody who comes on the show. If you had an airplane, environmentally friendly, of course, that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Oh, that's the best question. Wow. Okay. I need to take a moment.
Take your time. Ba 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 ba. I'll just sing the Jeopardy theme song for you.
Wow. This feels momentous. I'm still thinking.
It's not a problem. It's not a problem. While you're thinking, I will say the following. You have been listening to the Creative Solutions Podcast. I am your host, Izolda Trachtenberg. I've been speaking with author and world traveler, Jaclyn Goldis. You need to obviously go check her out. And actually, she and I have decided we're the same person, basically. So you're going to have, if you like what I'm doing, you're going to love what she's doing. And check out the Chateau. I'm in the middle of reading it and I am loving it. It's like reading modern Agatha Christie. That's sort of the way that I would review it. If I were reviewing it, I would say that it's like reading a modern Agatha Christie novel. So contemporary, but also some stuff that takes place 70 years ago. You're gonna really enjoy it. I think it's a really cool book. So now back to you, Jaclyn. Any thoughts on your comment about this?
I think I would have it I would skywrite um you are beautiful and amazing and perfect and all is so well. I think that's what I would skywrite for
I
anyone to
love
see.
that. That is so great. It's funny. A few years ago, I've done 600 episodes of the show, and I asked this of everybody, and I did this episode where all I did was take that little bit of advice from everyone who's been on the show, and people have said that it is the most uplifting, wonderful thing to just listen. It's 3 minutes long or 4 minutes long.
Oh
Just
my God, I
listening
want to
to
listen to
yeah,
that.
it's so cool just to have that boom, boom, boom of people
Wow.
giving you this incredible life-changing, life-altering distilled advice. It's
Wow.
so much.
I want to listen to that. Can I listen to that on
Yeah.
your
Oh yeah,
on the
yeah.
podcast?
I'll
Oh,
send you. It's a podcast episode, so I'll send you the link. All right,
wow.
Jaclyn. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. I appreciate you. Jaclyn Goldis has been here with me talking about writing, creativity, intuition, inspiration, and how to live your best frickin' life. Until next time, this is Izolda Trachtenberg. I'm reminding you that mindfulness and creativity go hand in hand. Please remember to be both mindful and creative. And as always, be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Izolda Trachtenberg and is copyright 2023. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, keep living what you believe in. Bye.